The mysterious arrival. It was past midnight when David heard the knock. At first, he thought he was imagining it. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that made even the wind sound too loud. But then, the knock came again. Weak, barely there, like someone had no strength left. David frowned. Who would knock on his door at this hour? He lived alone in a small house at the edge of town. No one visited him, not even by accident. Curious but cautious, he grabbed a flashlight from the table and walked to the door. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned the handle and pulled it open. The sight before him made him freeze. A woman stood there, but she was not human. Her skin was pale blue, almost glowing under the moonlight. Her eyes were too large, with no whites, only deep, shining silver. Her silver outfit was torn, stained with something dark. Her short white hair was messy, sticking to her forehead. She was breathing heavily, her legs shaking as if they would give up any second. Then they did. She collapsed forward. David caught her before she hit the ground. She was cold, too cold, like she had been out in freezing weather for hours. He could feel her body trembling in his arms. The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, but then she saw his face. Her entire body stiffened in terror. Her silver eyes widened. Her lips parted, but no words came out, just a sharp intake of breath, like she had seen a monster. David frowned. "Hey, are you okay?" The woman flinched at his voice. "No," she whispered, her voice weak and afraid. "No, please, not you." David felt a strange chill crawl up his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "I won't hurt you." She tried to push away from him, but she was too weak. "Stay back," she gasped, her hands shaking. "Please, don't kill me." David was stunned. "Kill her?" "Look, I don't know what's going on, but you need help," he said. "You're hurt." The woman shook her head wildly, her breathing becoming ragged. "You don't understand," she whispered. You are one of them." "One of who?" David asked, his patience running thin. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering something in a language he didn't understand. Her fingers clutched a small blinking device strapped to her wrist. It flickered red, then yellow, then red again. David looked up at the sky. The clouds were moving strangely. The air felt different, heavy, charged with something unseen. Then he heard it. A low, rumbling sound from above. Not thunder. Not a plane. Something else. The woman's eyes snapped open. She looked up at the sky and let out a choked gasp. "They found me," she whispered in pure horror. David's heart skipped a beat. "Who?" The woman didn't answer. She tried to stand, but her body gave up again. She fell to her knees, coughing hard. David made a decision. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she was afraid of. But she was dying, and he wasn't the kind of person to let someone die on his doorstep. Without another word, he lifted her into his arms and carried her inside. The moment he shut the door, the lights flickered. The house groaned, like something unseen had just pressed against its walls. Outside, the sky rumbled louder. David looked down at the alien woman in his arms. Her breathing was slow, her body limp. But even in her weakness, she still looked at him with fear in her eyes. Like he was the real danger. David clenched his jaw. Whatever was out there, it was coming for her. And now, it would come for him too. A fear beyond words. David stood in the dimly lit living room, his heart pounding. The woman, no, the alien, lay unconscious on his couch. Her breathing was shallow, her pale blue skin unnaturally cold. Outside, the sky was wrong. The night felt heavy, thick with something unseen. The air itself hummed, carrying an eerie tension. David walked to the window, careful not to make noise. He pulled back the curtain just an inch. Then he saw it. A massive dark shape hovered above the trees, silent, unmoving. It wasn't a drone. It wasn't a plane. It was something else entirely. A shadow against the stars, shifting and pulsing like a living thing. A cold chill crept down his spine. Something was out there, and it was looking for her. She wakes up. A sudden gasp behind him made him spin around. The alien woman was awake. She sat up too fast, panic flooding her silver eyes. She clutched her arm, wincing, and frantically looked around. Her gaze landed on David. Terror returned to her face. David raised his hands. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you." She pressed herself against the couch, as if expecting him to attack. "Where am I?" Her voice trembled. "My house," David said slowly. "You collapsed at my doorstep." Her breathing hitched. She looked down at her wrist, at the blinking red device strapped to her arm. It flashed faster now, almost urgently. She squeezed her eyes shut. "No, no, no." David stepped forward. "You need medical help. Let me." She flinched. "Don't touch me." David froze. The fear in her voice was real. She wasn't just scared. She was terrified. Of him. A name and a warning. The woman swallowed hard, her breath shaky. You are human." David frowned. "Yeah." She stared at him like he had just told her he was death itself. David felt something cold settle in his gut. "Why does that scare you?" The alien woman didn't answer right away. She hesitated, as if saying it aloud would make it real. Finally, she whispered, "Because your kind is supposed to be extinct." David felt his body go stiff. "What?" She pressed her lips together, eyes flicking toward the ceiling, toward the thing hovering above them. "They are coming," she whispered. "They saw me enter. They won't let me leave. And now, they won't let you live either." David clenched his fists. "Who?" She looked back at him. "The hunters." The word sent a shiver through him. It was the way she said it, like it was a curse, a nightmare spoken aloud. He exhaled sharply. "You still haven't told me your name." She hesitated again. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "Lorana." David nodded. "Okay, Lorana. You need to tell me what's going on." She shook her head. "There is no time. The hunters arrive." A low, thrumming sound filled the air. The walls of the house vibrated. David's stomach twisted. The black shape outside was moving. Lorana looked at the device on her wrist. The red light turned solid. Her hands clenched. "They found me." A noise, a deep metallic hum, echoed from outside. David turned to the window and pulled the curtain aside just enough to see. And that's when he saw them. Tall, armored figures moving through the shadows. They were coming for her. For both of them. Lorana grabbed his wrist, her fingers cold as ice. "You don't understand," she whispered, eyes wild. "If they know what you are, they will kill you first." David's blood ran cold. "What I am," he echoed. "I'm just a guy." Lorana shook her head. "No, you are a human." David had never felt his own name spoken with such dread. And then, boom, the front door shattered inward. The hunters in the sky. The door exploded inward. Splinters of wood flew across the room as David instinctively threw himself back. The force of the blast knocked over a chair, sending it crashing against the wall. Smoke and dust filled the air. Through the haze, shadows moved. Tall, imposing figures stepped inside. Their armor gleamed black, their helmets smooth and faceless. Their bodies were unnaturally still, too precise, too controlled, like machines in the shape of men. David's heart pounded. These weren't soldiers. These were something else. Lorana gasped in terror. Her trembling hand grabbed David's wrist, squeezing hard. "Stay still," she whispered urgently. But it was too late. One of the armored figures turned its head toward them. A red visor glowed across its helmet. "Target acquired," a deep mechanical voice rumbled. David's blood ran cold. The hunter's purpose, David's survival instincts screamed at him to run, fight, do something. But his body refused to move. It was like the sheer presence of these beings locked him in place. One of the hunters raised its arm. A small device on its wrist blinked green. A pulse of energy spread through the room. Lyanna cried out, clutching her head. Her body convulsed, as if something unseen was pressing down on her. David felt it too. His skin burned. His ears rang. It wasn't pain. It was worse. It was like something inside him was being pulled, scanned, studied. Then the hunter spoke. Human detected. David barely had time to react before all the hunters in the room stepped back. It wasn't fear. It wasn't caution. It was something else. David watched as the lead hunter, taller than the rest, tilted its head slightly, like it was processing. Then it spoke again. Impossible. David clenched his fists. What the hell are you talking about? The hunter didn't respond right away. Instead, it slowly lowered its weapon. The others did the same. Lyanna stared in horror. No, she whispered. They're afraid. David's heart pounded. Afraid. Of me. That didn't make sense. But then, the lead hunter spoke again, and what it said sent a chill through David's soul. This is not a fight we can win. Fall back. The hunters turned and walked away. The silent retreat. David watched in disbelief as the figures vanished into the night. Their movements were quick, deliberate. No hesitation. No explanation. Within seconds, they were outside. And then, a deep humming sound filled the air. The ground vibrated beneath David's feet. Through the broken doorway, he saw it, the black ship above the trees. A long beam of light shot down, enveloping the hunters. They rose into the air, pulled upward into the ship's belly. A moment later, the ship was gone, vanished into the sky without a sound. The only proof they had ever been there was the destroyed door and the heavy feeling in the air, like the night itself had witnessed something it didn't understand. David turned to Lyanna. She was still shaking. He swallowed. What the hell just happened? She looked at him, her silver eyes wide with something between fear and awe. They ran, she whispered. They never run. David frowned. You're saying they're some kind of galactic boogeyman, and they just left. Lyanna nodded slowly. They kill. They hunt. They never stop. Her hands clenched into fists. But they saw you, and they ran. David exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. That doesn't make any damn sense. Lyanna hesitated. Then she whispered something that made his stomach twist. Because you are human. David looked at her, confused. Yeah, and? She shook her head. You don't understand. Humans are. She took a shaky breath. Humans are supposed to be extinct. David felt something cold settle in his chest. That's the second time you've said that, he muttered. What the hell do you mean? She looked him straight in the eyes. Your kind is the most feared species in the galaxy. The war humanity forgot. David let out a sharp laugh. You're joking. Lyanna didn't smile. I wish I was. David ran a hand through his hair. This was insane. You're telling me humans are some kind of legend. She nodded. The destroyers, she said, her voice almost reverent. The ones who fought the unending war. The ones who conquered. The ones who vanished. David narrowed his eyes. Vanished. Lyanna swallowed. The last records say humans fought a war that lasted centuries. And then, you disappeared. Some say you were wiped out. Some say you fled. But one thing is certain. She looked down at her shaking hands. No one has seen a human in over 1,000 years. David's head spun. This was ridiculous. He was a normal guy. He had a job. A house. He wasn't some lost warrior from an ancient war. This is insane, he muttered. I'm not special. I'm just me. Lyanna shook her head. It doesn't matter what you think. What matters is what the galaxy thinks. David exhaled sharply. And what's that? She met his gaze. That you are a nightmare come back to life. David's breath caught in his throat. Lur-Anna stood up, her body still weak, but her voice steady. Those hunters left because they were afraid. They thought your kind was gone forever. Now they know the truth. David frowned. What truth? Lur-Anna's expression darkened. That humanity has returned. The truth she feared. The night air was heavy, thick with unanswered questions. David stood in the wreckage of his front door, staring into the darkness where the hunters had vanished. The last trace of them was the eerie silence they left behind. They had come to kill. They had every advantage. And yet they ran. Because of him. David turned to Lur-Anna, the alien woman who had collapsed at his doorstep. She sat on his couch, still trembling. Her silver eyes flickered with something between exhaustion and terror. David exhaled, running a hand through his hair. You need to start talking. Lur-Anna swallowed hard. I don't know where to begin. Try explaining why a bunch of armored alien assassins just broke into my house, scanned me, then ran like I was their worst nightmare. Lur-Anna hesitated, her hands clutching the small blinking device strapped to her wrist. The light pulsed faintly, still warning of unseen danger. Finally, she whispered, Because you are human. David narrowed his eyes. So, I don't get it. I know aliens exist now, but that doesn't explain why they were afraid of me. Lur-Anna's expression darkened. You are not just human, she said softly. You are something far worse. David crossed his arms. I don't feel worse. I feel normal. She looked up at him, her silver eyes searching his face. How much do you know about your own history? David shrugged. The usual. Wars, space exploration, technological advancements. Nothing about a secret galactic empire, if that's what you're getting at. Lur-Anna let out a breath. That's because your history is incomplete. David frowned. What do you mean? Lur-Anna hesitated. Then she stood, weak but determined. I need to show you something. The Forgotten War. Lur-Anna lifted her wrist device and pressed a small, glowing button. A holographic image flickered to life between them. David's breath caught in his throat. The projection showed a massive war. Battleships the size of cities burning in the void of space. Armies of alien species fought in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Planets shattered. Moons cracked apart. It was chaos. It was destruction. And at the center of it all were humans. Not like him. Not like the people he knew. These humans were taller, stronger, faster. They moved like ghosts, ripping through enemy forces like gods of war. Their eyes glowed with something unnatural. Their weapons burned with a fire that refused to be extinguished. David stared in shock. This, he whispered, this can't be real. Lur-Anna nodded grimly. It is. The hologram shifted, revealing a fleet of human warships, sleek, black, and terrifying in their design. David's pulse pounded in his ears. He had seen a lot of sci-fi movies, but this felt different. It felt real. They called you the Destroyers, Lur-Anna continued. You were not the largest empire. You were not the most advanced. But you were, she swallowed, unstoppable. David watched in silence as entire planets fell before the human onslaught. No hesitation, no mercy. The galaxy had tried to resist, tried to fight back. But humanity never lost. Until one day, they were gone. The hologram glitched and faded. Lur-Anna lowered her wrist device, her hands shaking. No one knows what happened, she whispered. One day, your kind was everywhere. The next, you had vanished. David's throat felt dry. And you think I'm connected to this? Lur-Anna nodded. You are proof that the Destroyers never disappeared. And if you exist. Her voice trembled. Then others might too. The galaxy's greatest fear. David paced the room, trying to process what he had just seen. This was insane. Humans weren't some mythical warlords. They were explorers, scientists, inventors. Not whatever the hell he had just witnessed. He stopped, turning back to Lyrana. If this is true, why doesn't anyone on Earth know? Lyrana exhaled sharply. Because Earth is isolated, cut off. The galaxy left it alone. David frowned. Why? Lyrana's voice dropped to a whisper. Because they are afraid you will remember. David's stomach twisted. The hunters, the ones who broke in here, he said slowly. They weren't just after you. Lyrana nodded. No. They wanted to see if the stories were true. If humanity was truly gone. She looked at him, her expression heavy with realization. Now they know you exist. And that means they will come back. David clenched his fists. His entire life had been ordinary until tonight. Now he was apparently the last trace of a forgotten war. And something told him that the galaxy wasn't going to leave him alone anymore. The sky is watching. A low hum filled the air. Lyrana's device flashed red again. Her eyes widened. No. David felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. What? She looked at him in horror. They're scanning again. David's breath caught. Outside, the night sky flickered, as if something massive and unseen was shifting above the clouds. Lyrana grabbed his hand, her fingers ice cold. We have to leave. Now. David hesitated. Go where? Lyrana's eyes darkened. There's only one place where they won't follow. David felt his pulse quicken. And where's that? She swallowed hard. The ruins of the last human empire. David exhaled sharply. He had no reason to believe any of this was real. But the fear in Lyrana's eyes told him everything. His life was over. And a new one he never wanted, was about to begin. The forgotten war. The night sky felt too quiet. David's heart thumped hard in his chest as he stood next to Lyrana, staring up into the darkness. Something was there, watching, waiting. Lyrana's wrist device continued to blink red, faster and faster. They're scanning, she whispered. They don't know where you are yet, but they will. David clenched his fists. You said they wouldn't come back. Lyrana shook her head. I said they ran. That doesn't mean they won't return with more. David felt a pit in his stomach. A part of him still wanted to believe this wasn't real. But the broken door, the vanished hunters, the weight of Lyrana's fear, they all told him otherwise. This was happening. And if what she said was true, then the entire galaxy now knew something it had feared for 1,000 years. Humanity had returned. The lies we were told. Lyrana turned toward him. We need to go, she said, her voice urgent. David exhaled. Go where? Earth is my home. I'm not about to run just because some overgrown tin cans are afraid of me. Lyrana hesitated. Then she whispered, Earth is not your home. David stared. What? Lyrana looked away. She wasn't sure if she should tell him, but time was running out. She had no choice. She took a deep breath. Earth was never supposed to be part of the galaxy. It was hidden. David frowned. Hidden. Lyrana nodded. After the war, the surviving species agreed on one thing. Humans could never be allowed to rise again. But wiping out an entire species wasn't easy, and some were afraid of what would happen if they failed. David crossed his arms. So they didn't kill us. Lyrana shook her head. No. Instead, they erased Earth from the galactic records, cut it off from all contact. You were left to decay, to forget. David felt a chill go through him. That's why we never found aliens, he muttered. They weren't avoiding us. They were hiding from us. Lyrana nodded grimly. And now, they know the truth. Humans aren't extinct. One of you still exists. David took a step back. His entire life, everything he had known, it was all a lie. But if humans had been feared, if they had been erased, what were they afraid of? The awakening. David clenched his fists. You said humans were warriors, destroyers. But I don't feel different. I don't feel like some kind of lost god of war. Lyanna studied him. That's because you don't remember. David frowned. What's that supposed to mean? Lyanna hesitated. The stories say that human power isn't just in your body. It's in your blood. It's dormant, waiting. David let out a sharp laugh. Oh, great. So I'm not just a lost warrior. I'm a sleeper agent. Lyanna didn't smile. Maybe not an agent, but something in you is different. The hunters sensed it. That's why they scanned you. That's why they left. David exhaled, his mind spinning. This was insane. But at the same time, it made sense. The moment the hunters scanned him, they backed off. They didn't fight. They didn't argue. They just ran. David shook his head. No, I'm not buying it. I've never felt whatever you're talking about. Lyanna's gaze softened. You will. David scoffed. And when is that supposed to happen? Lyanna hesitated. Then she glanced at her wrist device. The red light had stopped flashing. She paled. David noticed. What's wrong? Lyanna grabbed his arm. They're not scanning anymore. David frowned. That's good, right? Lyanna shook her head. No, that means they found us. The hunters return. A shadow passed over the house. David barely had time to react before a thunderous boom shook the ground. The front yard lit up in eerie blue light. The air vibrated. The smell of burned ozone filled his lungs. David turned toward the door. Through the broken entrance, he saw them. More of them. Not 3, not 5, but dozens. They stood in a perfect formation, black armor gleaming, weapons humming with lethal energy. David swallowed hard. This wasn't an assassination squad. This was an army. Lyanna froze. Her face was pale, her breathing ragged. They sent a full strike force. David's pulse pounded. Why? He asked. If they're scared of me, why not leave me alone? Lyanna's fingers dug into his arm. Because they're not here to fight you, she whispered. David frowned. Then what? Lyanna turned to him, her eyes filled with something worse than fear. Panic. They're here to contain you. David's body tensed. Contain. Lyanna nodded. If they can't kill you, they'll make sure you never wake up. David exhaled sharply. So what's the plan? Surrender. Lyanna met his gaze. No, she said. We run. David hesitated. Then he saw movement. One of the hunters raised its weapon. A deep hum filled the air. Lyanna's grip tightened. Now, she shouted. David didn't think. He moved. The moment he did, everything changed. His legs felt lighter. His body felt faster. He grabbed Lyanna and dove for cover just as a blast of blue energy shattered the ground where he had been standing. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His adrenaline spiked. The hunters rushed forward. David turned toward Lyanna. What now? Lyanna's silver eyes locked onto his. We find your people, she said, before they find you first. David didn't hesitate. He clenched his fists. It was time to wake up. Escape or fight. The night was alive with danger. David and Lyanna barely had a moment to breathe before the hunters attacked. A blast of blue energy tore through the wall, sending wood and debris flying. David ducked, shielding Lyanna as sparks rained down. Outside, the strike force moved like ghosts, advancing with deadly precision. Their weapons glowed in the darkness, humming with barely contained power. There were too many. They weren't here for a fight. They were here to end it before it began. David's pulse pounded. He had two choices: run, or prove why humans were once feared. The moment of decision. Lyanna grabbed his arm. We can't fight them, she gasped. Not yet. David clenched his jaw. Every instinct screamed at him to stand his ground. But instinct wasn't enough. Not against these things. Lyanna was right. They weren't ready. He nodded. Then we run. Lyanna's fingers flew over her wrist device, pressing a rapid sequence of commands. The screen flickered, then emitted a high-pitched pulse. The hunters paused. Their armor vibrated slightly, as if reacting to an unseen force. David felt the change immediately. The air thickened. The lights from their weapons flickered. "What did you do?" David whispered. Lyanna didn't look up. Jammed their sensors. "It'll buy us seconds. Maybe 10. David took a deep breath. 10 seconds to escape. It wasn't enough. But it would have to be. The chase begins. Lyanna grabbed his hand. "Move." They bolted through the shattered doorway, running into the darkened forest beyond the house. The moment they left the structure, the hunters recalibrated. Targets escaping. A sudden mechanical screech echoed through the trees. Then, they came after them. David had never been hunted before. But he had never felt this fast before, either. Each step felt lighter, as if his body was designed for speed. The trees blurred past him, the wind rushing in his ears. Lyanna struggled to keep up. "How?" she panted. "How are you moving like this?" David didn't have an answer. He just ran. The forest of shadows. The trees stretched high and dark, their branches forming a twisting maze around them. Lyanna stumbled. David caught her before she fell, barely breaking stride. She winced. I can't." David looked behind them. The hunters were gaining. There was no way she could outrun them. David made a decision. Without thinking, he lifted her into his arms and kept running. Lyanna gasped. "David, just hold on." David pushed forward, faster than ever. The hunters moved in perfect formation, weaving between the trees, their armor gleaming in the dim light. Their weapons whined, preparing to fire. David didn't slow down. His legs burned, but he ignored it. His lungs should have been screaming for air. But they weren't. Something inside him had awakened. Something buried deep. And it was carrying him forward. Lyanna gripped his shoulder. "David, you're not normal." He gritted his teeth. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." The edge of the world. A sudden drop in the terrain sent a warning through David's senses. Ahead, the forest ended. Beyond it lay a massive canyon, the kind that didn't have a bottom. David skidded to a stop just in time. Lyanna's eyes widened. No, 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 no. David turned. The hunters had them cornered. The black armored figures emerged from the trees, surrounding them on all sides. Weapons raised. There was no escape. Lyanna trembled. We're trapped. David clenched his fists. Maybe. Lyanna looked at him in disbelief. There's no maybe. It's over. David exhaled slowly. No. His voice was calm, steady. Something in his blood told him otherwise. The hunters took a step forward. Surrender. David rolled his shoulders. For the first time, he didn't feel fear. Instead, he felt ready. He took a slow step forward. The lead hunter tilted its head slightly, analyzing. Then it said something that made Lyanna's breath hitch. "Your power is awakening." David narrowed his eyes. His pulse felt like thunder. The world slowed. Lyanna whispered, "David." David met the hunter's gaze. "I think." He flexed his fingers. Electricity crackled at his fingertips. "I finally know why you're afraid of me." The first strike. The lead hunter moved first. Fast. Faster than anything David had ever seen. But this time, David was faster. He twisted aside, the hunter's blade slicing empty air. In the same motion, David struck. A simple punch. But when his fist connected, the hunter's armor shattered. The force sent it flying back, crashing into a tree so hard the trunk splintered. David's eyes widened. What the hell? The other hunters hesitated. Lyanna gasped. That shouldn't be possible. David exhaled sharply. His pulse felt like a drum. His body felt alive. No, not just alive. Awake. The hunters exchanged silent signals. Then, they all attacked at once. David smiled. Let them come. The return of the destroyers. The moment stretched, frozen in time. David stood at the edge of the canyon, his heart pounding, his breath slow. Across from him, dozens of hunters raised their weapons, their black armor gleaming under the faint moonlight. Their movements were calculated, precise, machines of war. But for the first time, they hesitated. And David felt it. Something deep in his bones. A memory he had never lived. A strength he had never trained for. A power that had always been there, buried. Now it was awake. And it was angry. The lead hunter's red visor flickered. It tilted its head, scanning him again. Human anomaly detected. Impossible. David rolled his shoulders. He could still feel the electric pulse beneath his skin, his muscles thrumming with something new, yet familiar. It wasn't magic. It wasn't mutation. It was his birthright. Humanity's birthright. And these hunters had spent 1,000 years fearing it. David took a step forward. No more running. Then the battle began. The awakening of a warrior. The hunters moved first. They attacked in perfect unison, their motions fluid and lethal. Plasma blades ignited, cutting through the air like liquid fire. David barely had time to think. But his body knew what to do. He sidestepped the first strike with impossible speed. His movements weren't just fast. They were effortless, instinctual. A second hunter lunged. David caught its wrist, twisted, and snapped the entire arm backward. The hunter screamed, sparks flying from its exposed joints. David didn't stop. His other hand clenched into a fist of pure force. When he punched, the air boomed with the impact, like a cannon blast. The hunter was sent flying backward, crashing into 3 more. They didn't get back up. David exhaled, surprised at himself. His body felt like a weapon. No, it had always been one. He just hadn't known how to use it, until now. Luriana watches in fear. Luriana pressed herself against a rock, her heart pounding violently. She had known. She had suspected. But seeing David move like this, fight like this, was something else entirely. He wasn't just fast. He wasn't just strong. He was terrifying. A single unarmed human was cutting through a galactic kill squad like they were nothing. And the worst part, it wasn't even difficult for him. The last stand. The hunters realized it too. Their leader raised a hand. Formation shift. Maximum force. Target must not escape. The remaining soldiers adjusted instantly. Weapons locked. A low hum filled the air. David recognized it. A pulse cannon. He didn't know how he knew, but he did. And he knew exactly what would happen next. They were preparing to fire something that would level the entire canyon. He couldn't dodge it. There was only one choice. David planted his feet. His heartbeat slowed. The hunters fired. And David met the blast head-on. The power of the destroyers. The energy wave engulfed him. Luriana screamed. No. The canyon shook under the impact, dust and debris flying into the air. For a moment, nothing moved. Then the dust began to settle, and David was still standing, unaffected. The ground beneath him was cracked. The air around him burned with static, but he was unharmed. More than that, he felt stronger. He looked down at his hands. His skin glowed faintly, humming with an unseen force. The blast hadn't just hit him. It had been absorbed. David clenched his fists. His veins burned with power. And for the first time, he understood. The stories were true. Humans weren't just feared because of their brutality. They were feared because they were indestructible. Because they were the only species the galaxy could never break. And now, after 1,000 years, they were back. The hunter's fear. The lead hunter took a step back. For the first time, Lur Anna saw it. They had tried to wipe out humanity. They had erased them from history. But in their fear, they had forgotten something. You can't erase what was built to survive. David looked at the terrified soldiers before him. "Run," he said. His voice was calm, certain. "Because if you don't," he raised his hand. Lightning cracked at his fingertips. "You'll learn why your ancestors feared us in the first place." The hunters didn't hesitate. They turned and fled. The beginning of a war. Lur Anna stared in shock. It had happened again. The most advanced killing machines in the galaxy had just abandoned their mission. Because of one man. David exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Guess I really am special." Lur Anna swallowed hard. "You don't understand. They'll come back." David nodded. "I know." Her voice shook. "No, you don't. This wasn't just a mission. This was a test. They weren't here to kill you. They were here to see if the stories were true." She looked at him with pure dread. "And now, they know they are." David's fists clenched. "Then let them come." Lur Anna trembled. "It's not just the hunters. Now that they've seen you, the entire galaxy will know." She took a slow breath. "The war that ended 1,000 years ago. It's about to start again." David looked at the stars. Somewhere, far beyond Earth, beyond the isolation the galaxy had placed on them, someone was listening, watching. And soon, they would come. For him. For Earth. For war. David cracked his knuckles. 1,000 years ago, humanity disappeared. Now, they were coming back. And this time, they weren't going to disappear again.